Today, I'm going to show you how to make an in-game leaderboard inside of UEFN. You can use this to track different stats, like eliminations, resources, or score. In this tutorial specifically, I'm going to be showing you how to use the score manager to control the leaderboard. But first, if you're watching this, chances are you either already make Fortnite maps, or at least plan to do so. But just like everyone else, you don't want to spend the grueling time and effort it takes to learn how to make the complicated mechanics you need to make the maps that you actually want to create. That's where Map Academy comes in. With all the scripts and assets you need to make your games come to life, Map Academy allows you to skip the hard part and get right into doing the things that you actually love to do. But not only will you be saving time, you'll also be saving money. Compared to the prices of costly developers, Map Academy offers an affordable solution without compromising on quality or functionality. So what are you waiting for? Go into the description right now and sign up today. Anyways, let's get right back into the video. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to go into my Verse Explorer, hit right click, and add a new verse file. I'm going to name this Leaderboard Manager and hit create. Once this is created, I'm just going to double click on it to open this up. First thing I'm going to need is the score manager. So I'm going to make an editable score manager of type score manager, just like so. This is incorrect because it actually needs to be a score manager device. I'll just copy and paste that there. This is going to be used to actually track the player's score, so we have something to rank off of. If you wanted to, it's completely okay to use a custom score, but you'd have to manage that in Verse. In this tutorial, I'm just going to be using the score manager to do that for me. The next thing we're going to need is actually going to be the billboards that are going to display the leaderboard. So I'm going to make an editable called Billboards, and it's going to be an array of billboard devices, and just equal to an empty array. Now the next thing we're going to need to do is actually make a loop that's going to constantly check all of the players' scores. So I'm going to make a function that'll do this. So I will call that update score loop. And then let's go ahead and create this function now. So I'll call it update score loop. It's going to take nothing. It's going to be suspending because we want to have a loop in it. And it's going to return nothing or void. So in this, we're first just going to go ahead and make a loop and sleep 1 second. That means every single second, everything that we put underneath this is going to happen. So in this loop, what we're going to want to do is create an array of every single player's scores, and we want it to be sorted. So let's go ahead and get every single player's score and make an array out of it. So first we'll go ahead and make that array, which will be empty at first. We're going to call it all scores. And it's going to be of type array of integers because the score manager uses integers. And we're just going to set it equal to an empty array. So it's going to have nothing in it. Then we're going to want to get all of the players' scores and add it to this array. So to get every single player's score, we're going to say for every single player in get play space. So this will get the play space. And then in that play space, we want to get all of the players inside of it. So with this, we're going to go through every single player in our game. And then for every single player, we are going to get their score. So we'll say current player score is equal to, and then to get their score, if we go to our score manager device, it didn't let us control click on it because we have an error. So what you can do is actually just go to your Fortnite digest and search for the score manager device here. So in our score manager device, we have this function called get current score agent. So it'll get the current score for that agent or that player. So we'll go ahead and copy that, go back into this, and we'll say our current player score is equal to the score manager dot. Then we call this function get current score, and we'll call it for our player. So now we have a for loop that's going to go through every single player and is going to get their score. And then we want to add that score to this array of integers, which is going to be all of our scores. So I will then say set all scores plus equal to array current player score. So now once this for loop completes, our all scores array is going to have the scores of every single player in our game. Now what we want to do is actually sort these scores. So to do this, let's go ahead and actually make a function for this. Let's go ahead and call it sort all scores. So we want this to take in an array of integers or our scores. So we're just gonna name this unsorted scores, and it's going to be an array of integers. So that's what it's going to receive, and then it's going to return, instead of a void, an array of integers. So it's going to take in an array of integers. It's going to be called unsorted score, and then it's going to return another array of integers, which are going to be the sorted scores, but now we actually have to make a method to sort them. So for this, I'm going to be using something called a bubble sort, which is really popular in other coding languages and is the best method for smaller arrays like we're going to have. So the first thing we need to do is make a new array, and we're going to call it our sorted array. And it's going to be an array of integers, and we're going to set it equal to our unsorted array at the beginning. So with this, then we're also going to go ahead and make a return sorted array so that it knows that we want to make it return this array, but now we need to actually make a method to sort it. So the first thing we need to do is go through every single element in this sorted array and get the index for that. So to do this, I'll say for every index from 0 to our array dot length, but we also need to do a -1 because the index is going to start at 0, and then we need a colon at the end. And then so for every single element in this array, I is going to be our index, and then for every single element in this array, we also need to go through every single element in the array again. So just say j is equal to 0 through our sorted array dot length minus I minus 2. If you're confused about why the minus I or minus 2, I'd recommend you go watch a video on a bubble sort. They can probably explain it a lot better than I can, and I'm sure there's lots of resources for this. So the next thing we actually need to do is get the current element and the next element and compare them. So what we'll do is say our element 1 is equal to our sorted array, and then the current element, which is going to be j, and then we'll get our element 2, which is going to be equal to the sorted array. Also, I realize I need to add an ed there. So element 2 is equal to sorted array, except this is going to be the same element as before, except we're 1 past it, so element plus 1. Now that we have both elements, we need to compare them. So if element 1 is less than element 2, then we need to switch them or swap them. So I will say if then set sorted array of the current element equal to, this needs to be capitalized, so the current element equal to our second element, and then set the sorted array of the next element, so j plus 1 equal to element 1. So this will just swap both of the elements here. And then with that, you now have a bubble sort that will take an array, go through all of the elements, and sort them out until they are in descending order from largest to smallest, and then return this array. So now let's go ahead and use this function by writing here. We'll just make a new variable called our sorted scores, and we'll set it equal to, let's go ahead and call this function the sort all scores, and then we're going to send this our all scores array. So now we have an array that's going to have all of our players' scores sorted properly in descending order. Now we actually need to assign each score to a billboard. So I'll go ahead and say for every single score in our sorted scores, and then let's go ahead and get the index. So if I do this, this will get the index for each. And then I will say our billboard is equal to the billboard that corresponds with the element in our sort scores. And here we have some errors. First, I need to change this from billboard to billboards. And then this, I need to change it to sorted scores. So what this does is goes through all of the sorted scores And for every single score, it's also going to get the billboard that is corresponding to the element. Meaning, the first iteration of this is going to get the very first score in this sorted score arrays, which is going to be our highest. And it's also going to get the first billboard in our billboard array. Now we actually need to set the text of this billboard. So I will say billboard.setText. And then we need to send it a message here. So let's go ahead and make a function I'm just going to type message and press tab. The reason this did this automatically for me is because I'm using this verse language snippets extension for VS Code. I would highly recommend it. Or you could just copy this right here. So this is going to get a string and return it as a message. So now I'll go ahead and call this function in my set text. And now I'm going to write the values I want. So the first thing is going to be the number. So I'll write number. To get the actual player's position, it'll be the element in the array. So player number 1 is going to be the first element in the array, which is going to be 0. So I will say our index, so that's going to be 0 plus 1. So the first element in the array, which is 0, we'll add that to 1. That'll mean the very first element in the array will display number 1, the second number 2, and so on. The next thing we're going to want to do is display the actual score. So I'll just go ahead and write our S, so that's going to be our player's score. And then the last thing we want to do is display the player's name, but we don't have the player. So to be able to display the player's name, we need to track what score corresponds to what player. So we're going to have to backtrack a bit. The first thing we want to do is, instead of our all scores array being an int, we want to make it a custom variable that is going to have both an integer for the score as well as the player that corresponds with that score. So to do this, the first thing we need to do is make a custom class. So I'll just call this our player scores, and it's going to be a class just like this. And in this, it's going to have a player, which is going to be, we'll make it a type agent. And then it's going to have a score, which is going to be of type int, and we'll just assign it to 0. So now if we change our all scores from being an array of integers to being an array of player scores, we'll get a couple errors. The first of which is we're trying to add an integer to this rather than a player score. So instead, we'll go ahead and add a player score. So whenever we go to add an element in this, we are going to make a new player score by doing this right here. And then let's go ahead and get rid of this. And then in this, the first thing we need to do is actually assign what the player value is going to be. So that'll be our player here that we're looking at. And then if I add a comma, we can also assign the score. So I'll say the score is equal to our current player score. All right, so now our all scores is properly set up. So we'll have an array of player scores rather than an array of integers. And then for every single player, we're going to add an element to this array, and that element is going to hold the player as well as the score of that player. Then the next thing we're doing is whenever we sort the scores, we're sending this an array of player scores now, but this is taking an array of integers. So let's go ahead and change that by instead make it take an array of player scores. Then the same thing here. This is an array of integers, and we're setting it equal to player scores, which isn't a thing. So let's change this integers to player scores. The next issue is we're trying to compare one player score from another. Instead, we're going to want to compare the player score.score to another player score.score. The last issue here is this is trying to return an array of player scores, but this function is set to return integers. So again, we'll just change that here. Then we get another error. So right here, previously this was an integer, but now it's a player score. So I'll just say s.score. So we'll get the score from that player score. And then the last thing we need is to put an agent here. So now we can just say s.player, right? Except this doesn't work because you can't just simply add an agent in a string and expect it to work. Instead, what we're going to need to do is go to our string to message function. And on top of taking a string, it's also going to take an agent, type agent. And then whenever we are returning a message, it should return the string as well as the agent. Now back here, whenever we actually call this string to message function, we want to first send it a string, which is going to be what this is. So it's going to first take a string, and then next we want to send it the agent. So we will add a comma and then send the agent, which will be our s.player. And just like that, you now have a leaderboard. So let's go ahead and test this out in game. I'll go to my UEFN, hit verse, build verse code. Then if you go to your content browser and go to your content folder, you'll have a leaderboard manager. In this, we need two things. One is a score manager, and then the other is the array of billboards. So I'll go to our content browser and search for a score manager, and then drag it into the play space. Here you can change things like the score value or how much score is awarded or anything, but nothing's necessary, so I'll just go ahead and select that. Then I am actually going to search for a button and drag it into the play space so that I can actually test this score manager out and test if it works. So I will click on my score manager, go down to activate, add an element, then select my button and select on interact. So now whenever I press this button, it's going to give me score. Then the next thing we have is our array of billboards. So if I search for a billboard device and drag it into the play space, here I'm just going to go ahead and change the text justification to center, change the size to something like 20 and add an outline. Then I want my first billboard to be at the top, and I'm going to duplicate this a couple times. So I'll just make 4 billboards like this, and then add these into my array in order from the top to the bottom. Just like so. Then let's go ahead and push changes, and I'm going to have my alt account on as well so I can test this. Alright, so now in game, you'll see our number 1 and number 2 are both assigned to different players. And if I go ahead and click this to add score to myself, you'll see it increases the number here, and I'm number 1. Now on my alt account, if you see that I add score, and if I overtake, you'll see I increase on the scoreboard. And this is going to update every single second like in our loop. And that's all you need to know to be able to set up your own in-game scoreboard inside of UEFN. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.